Hello everyone and welcome to the knitting tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create this cool knitting effect in geometry nodes, and we're going to use this effect later in our shoe 3D product animation. So first let me show you how this works and a little summary of the nodes. I have a mesh here. It's basically an icosphere. If I move it along the x-axis, it's building the fabric with some knitting effect. This is our texture and these are the threads. So we will blend this in between. We'll do some cool stuff to make it real and make it seem good. Let me show you the nodes, then we're going to start building it from scratch. So these are basically all the nodes. First, what I did here is I deleted the useless geometry, which is the dead part of the sphere. So if I show you, it looks like that. I deleted it just like that. I displaced the edges here, added some instances so they look something like that, and then I randomized the instances a little bit and gave them a control empty. So if I move this empty, these move with it. I displaced these curves to some kind of waves so they look like that. Now if we play the animation, it's moving in waves, and I added an edge where here, kind of blend the material and these instances together with this, and then finally if you preview everything, it looks like that, and it's animated too. We did some displacement stuff here, and overall a very realistic look. If I move it, it's cutting the off object and recreating it with these curves and stuff. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna do it on a sphere first, then we will apply this whole effect on a shoe 3D model and create a very cool animation of this effect. So I'm gonna hit Shift A to add a cube here, scale it up just a little bit, Control A to apply the scale, Control 2 to add some subdivisions, or Control 3 to add 3 levels of subdivisions, and apply the modifier and shade smooth. I'm gonna scale it up a little bit more and apply the scale. I want to add an icosphere here. The subdivisions should be 3. Grab y-axis, shade that one smooth, or what I can do is I can go to the viewport display and make it bounce. Then I'm gonna go to the geometry nodes, rename it to something like knitting, and create a new geometry node 3. Rename this to knitting. First I'm gonna cut unnecessary parts here. So let's add a mesh boolean here and import the icosphere right there. Make it relative and connect the geometry to mesh 2. I'm gonna turn on the matte cap and give some nice shading. So with that, then I'm gonna hide this mesh, and if I scale this, it will look like that. I'm gonna select the icosphere, go to the normals and make it auto smooth. So I'm gonna add a delete geometry node here. And now I'll make a very simple node group. So duplicate this object info node, add a geometry proximity node, and hook that up to the target, and then hit Ctrl G to group it. And we will use this node a lot. Connect the distance to the output, and there we get the distance. And I can connect this to the group input right there. So rename this group to the proximity and connect that to the selection. I'm gonna add a map range in between, map range, and just play with it till you get something better. And in between there, I'm gonna do some subdivisions. So basically we don't have the effect on that area, we only want the effect near the icosphere. So what I will do here is the areas that come near to the icosphere, I'll subdivide them more than these areas, so we get a better viewport performance. I hope you get that. So let's add a separate geometry node and duplicate this proximity and hook that up to the selection. Then I'm gonna add a map range right there and set it from 1 to 0. And if you preview this, it looks like that. And I'm gonna play with these and make sure to set this from edge to face. I'm gonna add a subdivide mesh node and preview the whole thing. So this delete geometry should be face, and then the subdivision levels can be something like 2, and connect this right there. I'm gonna add a join geometry node and connect the inverted one to the geometry right there, and bring that back invert it just like that, and we should be good to go. Just copy my values to get the result, or just look at your mesh and do whatever works for you. I'm gonna go to the wireframe mode to just see things better. I'm gonna go back a little bit, and yeah, that's it. Now your final mesh should look like that. So this was the first step and it's completed. You can just look at these nodes and copy the values. If something's not working, you can solve it. Now we're gonna go to the next step. I'm gonna frame that and F2 to rename it, delete, useless. Then after that, what I want to do is give it another subdivide mesh net, and now I'm gonna displace the boundaries right there. Just displace them up a little bit to sort of separate it from this area. So I'm gonna hit Shift A to add a set position node, and then in the offset I'm gonna add a vector math and set it to scale. Then Shift D to duplicate it 2 times and make this multiply, and the second one can be subtract. So in the multiplier, I'm gonna multiply it with the normals, connect that to the scale right there, and connect that to the vector, and subtract 0.5. Duplicate the proximity group that we made, Alt P to remove it from this black frame, and connect the distance to the vector. And you can see it looks very weird, but here we'll fix that with a map range and map the range of it. I'm gonna make it from 1 to 0, and then bring this value down just like that. You see it squashes it down a little bit, and I don't like that. So what I like to do is I will just remove the subtract node because we don't need it in this one, and play with these until you get some good results. And yeah, that's... No, I want to move this just back a little bit, so I'm gonna add a math node here and just sort of play with the values. Yeah, that's it. Then to minimum value can be just a little bit down, and in the math node bring it back just like that. Now the second step is done. Your scene should look like this now. I'll show you the wireframe just like that. Then after that, what I want to do is instance some instance threads on these. So let's add instance on points node, and then what I like to do is I will separate these edges from there, this edge geometry from this to this, and I'll distribute all the threads on there. So I'm gonna add a separate geometry node and add a separate geometry and connect this to the geometry, point to face, and then I'm just gonna reuse our proximity group, so Alt P, and connect the distance to the selection. Then I'm gonna add a map range node, and if we preview this, it looks like that. So the to minimum value should be 1 and to max value should be 0, and then bring that back just like that. Let's distribute some points on that. So let's add a distribute points on faces node, and the density should be something like 1000, and connect that to the points and preview that. In the instance, I'm gonna add, I think, a curved line. Make this from points to direction and 2 meters. Hide the mesh line and bring it up just like that. Then in the rotation, I'm gonna add an align Euler to vector node. Make it from X to Z and connect the normal to the vector, and your scenes should start looking like that. And add a join geometry node and just connect the original mesh here, which was that one. Now we added the threads here, but they don't look very good right now, so I'm gonna bring down the density something like 600. You can see it works with the normals here, so that's a good thing. Then what I want to do is bring these threads outwards in that way. For that, what I need to do is I'll add a set position node, and yeah, we'll just frame these together This is our fourth step, and F2 to rename it to add threads. Now we're setting the position of these curves that we made here. Add realize instances node to convert the threads to real geometry. Then I'm gonna add a endpoint selection node. Now if I set the end size to 0, so what it's doing here is these curves have just 2 points, one at the start and one at the end. So if I just set the end size to 0 and move it now, it's going to move the start points. So I'm going to make it 1 and start size should be 0. So if I move this one now, it's only going to move the end points of that, which is what I want. So I'm going to hide this node and bring it down just like that. Then in the offset, I'm going to add a vector math. Pretty simple stuff here. Set it to scale to sort of control the scale of the whole effect, and duplicate this node 2 times. Set this one to multiply, set this one to subtract 0.5, and multiply it with the, I think, normals, and connect the vector to the vector and this vector here to the vector. And then in this vector I'm going to add a noise texture factor here, and with that done, it looks good, so good. I'm going to bring down the scale of it, or just leave it like that. Set it to 40, and in the W I'm going to add a scene time node and play it. Now it looks like that. We just sort of added some little bit of randomness to the curves. Make the detail 0, and look what we got. And that's pretty good for now. Then what I want to do is I'm going to add another set position node. Just duplicate these 2 nodes and connect the geometry to geometry and this geometry to this, and make sure to disconnect this one. Then in the offset, I'm going to add another empty object here and sort of bring that over here. Rename the empty to controller and import it to the geometry nodes, relative, and connect the location of this empty to the offset. Now if we move this empty, it's going to move the whole thing. So we can control sort of the direction of these things right there. Now that's controlled. Bring the scale of this up or down. Something like 15 is gonna look good. And I'm gonna frame this step. Control J and F2 to set position of points, whatever you want to name it. So now your results should look like that. If you're getting any problems here, you can just look at the values or rewatch the tutorial here. And if we scale it, it's like that. And if you want to move this on that side, make sure to move the controller empty with it, because the direction will still be on the controller. So if I move it here, I can select the empty and move it there. Then it's pointing on the right direction. So that's good now. I'm gonna save the file quickly so we don't lose it. I'm gonna rename it to knitting and save it in the desktop. I'm gonna do some styling in these threads. So for that, I can add a wave texture or something. Yeah, we want some wavy type stuff coming in here, and it's gonna look very good. So I'm gonna add a set position node, and if we want the waves, we must have some points to work with, because it's just 2 points. One is over here and the last one is here, so we can't make waves with just 2 points. So I'm gonna add a resample curve node. So resample curve to something like 20 points. Do the simple stuff that we did here. So select these. I'm gonna select these nodes and duplicate them and hit Alt P to remove it from the frame, and connect the scale directly to the offset. And in the vector, I'm gonna add a wave texture and scale it down. Bring down the scale of the effect. The detail should be 0, and I'm gonna make it rings and rings and spherical. Then bring down the scale a little bit more, and you can see it starts to look very good. And in this one, we can just get this sort of waves moving effect. But here we got a problem. You can see if I change the phase offset of the wave, it can just disconnect from here. It's not connected anymore. You can see just like that. So for that, what I want to do is I have a value here which is the scale control of the whole effect. So what I can do here is these are curves and they have a start and end point. So we have a curve parameter node which is shows us the 0 to 1 value, and let me just show you how to use that. So I'm going to add a spline parameter node, spline parameter, and connect the length to the scale. Then I'm gonna add a color ramp or a map range as you want, or I'm gonna connect the factor to the factor here. If I change the phase offset now, the start of these curves has 0 effect. The scale is 0 on the start, and as it goes up, the scale goes up. So if I change the phase offset here, these are no longer disconnecting from our mesh. Pretty much we got a lot of control over the effect. I'm gonna hit Ctrl J to just frame this and keep things organized so that you don't mess it up. And after that, your nodes should look like that. I'm just gonna quickly show you the nodes and the values, and the effect should work like that. Now everything is happening so fast here. What I want to do is bring down the scale of the noise texture maybe. Yep, that fixed it. And after bringing down the scale, I'm going to animate the phase offset of the wave texture, this one. So let's add a scene time node here. And if we play it now, let's add a map node here to just speed it up a little bit. It's very slow. I'm gonna turn off this annoying auto offset thing here. Now if you look at that, we can multiply it with something like 15, and now the waves are also working. I'm gonna save this file. You wanna have a little bit control over the interaction and stuff, as this knitting and everything should affect the geometry a little bit. So what I mean here is we can displace the geometry a little bit more. So here what I want to do is I want to add a set position node after the step 1. Hook it up here and copy the same nodes from there. Copy these 3 nodes, hit Alt P to remove it from the frame, and connect the vector to the offset. And in here I'm going to add a noise texture, and it can be the factor or the color, whatever you want to use. Then I'm going to bring down the scale of the noise, detail down to 0, scale a little bit up. So that's good. I'm going to make the noise from 3D to 4D and hook up a scene time node to the W slider. And it's like that now. So for this scale value, I'm going to add another map range node, map range, and duplicate the same proximity node. We're using it a lot because it's the whole effect. It works with the proximity and a little bit of the boolean. So connect that here and sort of play with these to get the effect. But it's very fast, so what I want to do here is I can add a map node after the scene time node and multiply it with a smaller value of something like 0.5 is good. Bring up the scale factor. I can still add a subtract node, subtract 0.5. And yeah, that was what missing. We didn't add the subtract node here, and it fixed the thing a little bit. I can bring down the 2 max value a little bit now, bring down the scale, and sort of play with the values and see what you like here. Now I'm gonna just play around with these threads, make them something like that, play with this value, and yep, that is better. If I scale it or move it, it looks like that now. We did some small displacement, the step looks like that, very long node tree here. And then after that I'm going to convert these to meshes, these threads to meshes, and finally we're going to add a little bit of gradient in there to mix the texture we're doing here and the final threads. So let's add a curve to mesh node, curve to mesh, add a curve circle, and the resolution should be something like 5 or 4, and the radius, bring it down, and just like that, looks very good. We'll make it something like 0.15, and that's better. I'm gonna fill the caps and bring it back just like that, and our threads are done. You can play the animation and yep, that's it. Now we want to do the gradient between there. So some roots right there and then gradients, and then just combine it with the shading and the textures here so that it looks realistic and it looks like it's knitting. First I'm going to separate some geometry here. Then we'll convert it to curves. So what I mean here is I can just get this geometry, I think, yeah, that geometry. I'm gonna add a mesh to curve node, mesh to curve, and connect that to the mesh. Then after that I'm gonna add a separate geometry node and connect that here. Then in the selection I can make it face, and in the selection I can give it a map range, or if you like you can add a color ramp too, but I like to go with the map range. And once again I'm going to add the same group, which is our proximity, and connect the distance to the value. Now if we preview this, it looks like that, and we can sort of control, yep, I'm going to make the 2 minimum value to 1 and 2 maximum value to 0, and then we can convert these to curves. So bring that back just like that. This can be enough. Then I'm going to duplicate this separate geometry node, connect it here. So what we will separate now is the opposite geometry of that, which is the whole body here. So I'm going to duplicate the proximity node and connect it to the selection. Then what I can do is add a simple color ramp or a map range if you like, and I flip the color ramp and see what works. So if I preview this separate geometry node and sort of look at it, flip it again, bring the black values back a little bit, yep, and what I want to do is just preview the whole node tree here and connect this one here and connect the mesh to curve node in the join geometry at last. The result should look like that now, and I can bring that just back like that. Then we added the mesh to curve node. I can convert it back to the curve so that we can do some radius and other stuff. So convert curve to mesh, and in the profile I can add a circle, curve circle. The resolution can be 5 or 4 and the radius, bring it down. I'm going to add a set curve radius node right here. Duplicate the proximity node again and connect the distance to the radius here. And then what I like to do is add a color ramp and flip it if your effect is flipped, and bring the white value just back and then bring black value back just like that. Then sort of play with these and get the effect you want. The subdivision level to 1, it looks very bad here, so if I take the subdivision level and make it 1, and then I triangulate it, it's gonna look like that. I don't think it still looks good. If I go to this and F3 and unsubdivide the whole mesh, alteration to 1, this to 2. Now it's basically the same thing I think here. I can play with these values, bring them back a little bit, and bring this curve just like that, a little bit back, and bring them up. Play with these. So the radius of the ends is very low and the start is 1 here. And finally frame this one and rename your frames at last. So now it's gonna look like that. I'm gonna turn on the cycles and everything just to show you how it looks like. Turn on the scene world, and the threads are looking very good. You can hide this icosphere here. I'm gonna edge to height. Let me just add a material here. So this is the final look. The knitting is looking amazing. You can play with these threads or any value. Everything is possible. Just do some functions here, give them inputs, and it will give you a result. You can look for the results that you want. And I'm gonna be using this effect on our shoe model that we've modeled and textured and did everything in the first 2 parts of the shoe 3D product animation tutorials. We're gonna do the soft body simulations and this knitting effects, all the effects, lighting, and final render in the shoe. So this was basically done for the shoe. I wanted to be ready for that, so I made this effect for that. And this is it for today. I'll see you in the next tutorial. We'll animate the shoe together.